The vastness of space was home to many civilizations, each with its own unique strengths, technologies, and philosophies. The Galactic Concord, a coalition of the most advanced species in the universe, prided itself on its ability to assess and categorize every known race. They had conquered or assimilated countless planets, their fleets moving like unstoppable forces through the void. Then they met humanity. At first, humans were nothing more than another species to classify. They were an anomaly, an upstart civilization that had clawed its way out of its own planet's gravity, well using primitive chemical rockets before advancing to fusion-powered vessels. Their ships were not as sleek as the Kalari. They lacked the organic technology of the Var. They did not have the psionic capabilities of the Eldrin. Yet there was something about human warships that disturbed the Concord's analysts. The first encounter was with the hegemony of Trinax, a species known for its meticulous data collection. Their intelligence arm had always boasted of its ability to scan any ship, no matter how well it was shielded. They believed knowledge was power, and so when they encountered the first Terran warship, the TNS Dauntless, they immediately activated their deep space scanners. What they found changed everything. The ship's exterior was standard enough, composed of advanced alloys and shielded against most known forms of attack. But when the scanners attempted to penetrate deeper, they encountered something that had never been seen before. The data coming back was wrong. The readings fluctuated wildly. The ship's core registered as a fusion reactor one moment, an antimatter drive the next. The weapon systems seemed to phase in and out of known classifications, sometimes appearing as railguns, then energy cannons, then something entirely unidentifiable. More disturbingly, certain sections of the ship were black holes of information, as if the scanner's very signals were being devoured. Then, the Trinax scanners shut down entirely. Not just the ones scanning the ship. All of them. Across the hegemony's intelligence networks, deep space sensors went offline. The Trinax researchers monitoring the scan screamed in agony as their implants overloaded. Some suffered immediate neural failure, collapsing at their stations. Others clawed at their own faces, muttering incoherently about the whispers in the code. It took weeks to restore the Trinax systems, and when they did, they issued an unprecedented order. No Trinax vessel, under any circumstances, was to attempt scanning a human warship ever again. The Concord dismissed this as an anomaly, until it happened again. And again. The Solari, a race known for their organic computers and hyper-advanced bioengineering, attempted to decipher what was happening inside a Terran dreadnought. Their scanning tendrils, living organisms themselves, shriveled and died upon contact with the ship's energy signature. The Eldrin, whose psychic abilities could normally read the thoughts of entire planets, sent their most gifted minds to probe a human battlecruiser. They came back shattered, their minds reduced to gibbering wrecks, muttering about the screaming void inside the ship. Even the Dixari, who could predict the future with near-perfect accuracy, found that whenever they attempted to foresee the outcome of a battle involving human warships, their visions turned to static. They saw nothing. Or worse, they saw themselves already dead, long before the first shot was fired. The final straw came when the Galactic Concord's ruling council attempted to force a full-scale analysis. They sent a combined fleet, equipped with the most advanced scanning arrays in existence, to surround a single human battleship, the TNS Harbinger. What happened next was never publicly disclosed. What is known is that none of those ships ever returned. No distress signals, no debris, no explanation, just gone. After that, the Concord made an official decree. No species, no matter how advanced, shall ever attempt to scan a Terran warship again. because whatever was inside those ships was not meant to be understood. The Galactic Concord tried to suppress the growing fear surrounding human warships, but the truth had already begun to spread in whispers and fragmented data logs. Across the universe, scientists, tacticians, and spies speculated about what had gone so horribly wrong for those who had attempted to scan a Terran vessel. Some theorized that humanity had developed a form of quantum encryption so advanced that it scrambled the very perception of those who attempted to decipher it. Others believed the ships were shielded by some form of exotic matter that defied known physics. But the most unsettling theory came from the Eldrin, the most powerful telepaths in the galaxy, who had barely survived their attempt to probe human vessels. They claimed that human warships were not just machines. They were aware. The idea was dismissed by the more scientifically minded members of the Concord, but those who had encountered Terran ships firsthand knew better. There was something about the way they moved, how they responded to threats, how they always seemed to be just one step ahead of their enemies. It was as if the ships themselves were watching, calculating, waiting. One race, the daring and reckless Var, decided they would uncover the truth. Unlike the more cautious species of the Concord, the Var were warriors first and scientists second. Their empire was built on conquest, and they had yet to meet an enemy they could not dominate. They gathered a fleet, one of the largest ever assembled, and launched an assault on a Terran stronghold. At the heart of their target was a single human battleship, the TNS Oblivion. By all logic, the fight should have been an easy one. The Var fleet outnumbered the lone Terran ship 100 to 1. Their weapons were among the most devastating in the galaxy. Their commanders were seasoned veterans who had conquered countless systems. But the moment they engaged, something went terribly wrong. The Oblivion didn't move like a normal warship. It weaved through space with an unnatural fluidity, as though it could see the future, dodging barrages before they were even fired. The Var's targeting systems malfunctioned, locking onto empty space, or, even worse, their own allies. Then came the communications breakdown. The fleet's admirals barked orders, but their voices came back to them twisted, distorted, as if something was speaking through them. Some heard their own voices whispering, "Run." Others heard nothing at all but the deafening silence of the void. And then the screaming started. It didn't come from their enemies. It came from their own crews. Soldiers, pilots, tacticians, entire decks filled with warriors suddenly collapsing, clutching their heads, their eyes rolling back as they convulsed on the floor. No weapons had touched them. No visible force had struck their ships. Yet they were dying all the same, their minds unraveling from something unseen. One captain, before his ship was torn apart by an invisible force, managed to send out a single message to the Var homeworld. His final words were recorded, analyzed, and eventually buried by the Concord. It was just one sentence. "The ship is looking at me." When the battle was over, only the Oblivion remained. There was no wreckage, no debris, just silence. The mighty Var fleet had been erased, as if it had never existed. From that day forward, the Var, once the most feared conquerors in the galaxy, refused to speak of the battle. No records were kept, no survivors were found. The entire event became nothing more than a ghost story, passed in hushed voices among those who still dared to wonder what lay within the heart of a Terran warship. But one truth became undeniable. Even the bravest, the strongest, and the smartest aliens in the universe refused to scan a human warship ever again. The fear surrounding human warships grew, but it was more than just fear. It was a warning etched into the minds of those who had dared to seek answers and suffered for it. Entire civilizations had learned to avert their sensors when encountering a Terran vessel, treating them like cosmic anomalies best left undisturbed. And yet, there was always someone who refused to listen. The Zelnari, an ancient and arrogant species, considered themselves the pinnacle of intelligence. Their race had mastered reality-warping technologies, bending time and space at their will. Their minds functioned on a level so advanced that they viewed most other species as mere children fumbling in the dark. They had no love for the galactic conquered. To them, fear was the symptom of a lesser mind. Where the conquered saw danger, the Zelnari saw opportunity. So when the legends of human warships reached them, they did not hesitate. They had never encountered humans directly, never faced them in war or diplomacy. To them, Terrans were simply a primitive species that had stumbled upon something remarkable, something they had no right to possess. The Zelnari believed that whatever technology powered human warships could be stolen and understood. And so, the Zelnari High Council authorized Project Eclipse. A single, ultra-advanced research vessel was dispatched under the guise of neutrality. It bore no weapons, only the most powerful scanning equipment ever devised, capable of breaking through any defense, any deception. It could peer into the fabric of reality itself, uncovering the most hidden of truths. Their target? The TNS Eclipse, a Terran dreadnought patrolling the outskirts of human-controlled space. The Zelnari ship kept its distance, careful not to provoke a response. It did not engage in combat. It did not transmit a signal. It simply observed. At first, all seemed well. Their instruments captured normal readings, hull composition, heat signatures, gravitational distortions. But when they activated their deep-core scanners, something unexpected happened. The Eclipse turned. Not in an evasive maneuver, not to change course. It turned to face them. There was no possible way the human crew could have known they were being scanned. The Zelnari technology was undetectable, existing outside the normal dimensions of perception. And yet, the moment their scanners activated, the ship looked directly at them. A silence fell over the research team. Every Zelnari aboard felt something primal, an instinct they had not experienced in thousands of years. Dread. The lead scientist, a being who had mapped the very veins of time itself, hesitated. He did not understand why, but he could not bring himself to continue. His fingers hovered over the controls, paralyzed by something he could not name. Then the ship's systems began to fail. One by one, their instruments flickered and died. Their scanners, their shields, even their life support. All of it went dark. Panic spread across the crew as they scrambled to diagnose the failure, but there was no malfunction, no attack. Something was inside their ship, not a physical entity, not a cybernetic intrusion. Something was watching them. The lead scientist gasped as his vision blurred. He was no longer in his lab, no longer aboard his own ship. He was somewhere else. He stood in an infinite void, surrounded by whispers that had no source. Shapes shifted in the darkness, eyes forming and unforming, gazing upon him with something that was not curiosity, but judgment. The whispers turned to voices. He understood none of the words, but the meaning pierced his mind. "Do not look." The scientist screamed, collapsing as his consciousness snapped back into his body. He was lying on the cold metal floor of the Zelnari research vessel, gasping for breath. Around him, his crew was motionless, unmoving, dead. Their eyes were open, their mouths locked in silent screams. The Eclipse did nothing. It did not fire a single shot. It merely turned away, as if disinterested. By the time the Zelnari ship was discovered, drifting lifelessly in space, no one was left alive to explain what had happened. The data logs were corrupted beyond repair. The Zelnari High Council attempted to cover up the disaster, erasing all records of Project Eclipse. But whispers spread. Rumors, fears. Even among the most arrogant race in the galaxy, the message was clear. Do not scan human warships. Because some knowledge was never meant to be known. The incident with the Zelnari sent shockwaves through the Galactic Concord. If even they, beings who had mastered space, time, and the very essence of knowledge, could not comprehend what lay inside a human warship, then perhaps the truth was never meant to be uncovered. Fear turned to silence. Silence turned to avoidance. For decades, no species dared to scan a Terran vessel. Encounters with the Terran Navy were brief, often ending with alien ships altering their course without a word. The Concord, once determined to classify every race in the galaxy, quietly removed humanity from their records. But some still sought answers. The Drellic were a species of archivists, historians, and seekers of lost knowledge. Unlike the Concord's conquerors, the Drellic did not desire war or control. They simply wished to understand. To them, the mystery of humanity was the most enticing puzzle in the universe. And so one final attempt was made. A single Drellic scout ship, the Seeker's Gift, was sent to shadow a Terran fleet. They did not intend to scan the ships directly, only to record their movements, analyze their energy output, and decipher any patterns that could explain what had driven so many others to madness. For weeks, they followed in secret. The human fleet did not acknowledge them, did not show any sign of aggression. It was as if they did not care about the tiny, insignificant ship watching from the shadows. Then one day, without warning, the Terran flagship, TNS Omen, came to a dead stop. The rest of the fleet continued its course, but the Omen remained motionless, watching. The Drellic crew hesitated. They had not scanned the ship. They had done nothing to provoke a response. So why did it feel like the Omen had suddenly noticed them? Aboard the Seeker's Gift, an uneasy tension filled the air. The ship's captain, a veteran explorer named Kethril, debated whether they should turn back. The mission had been successful. Recording human fleet movements was an achievement in itself, but curiosity had been the driving force of Drellic evolution. And so, against his better judgment, Kethril issued the order. One scan. Passive only, just enough to understand why it stopped. The order was carried out. The ship's sensors reached out, gently, carefully, as if trying not to disturb something sleeping. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then every screen on the Seeker's Gift went dark. The ship shook violently, as if something had grabbed it. Instruments exploded in bursts of fire and static. The crew screamed as the ship's artificial gravity inverted, sending bodies crashing into the ceiling. And then, the voices began. Not through the ship's speakers, inside their minds. They were not words. They were thoughts, memories, not their own. They saw fire and steel, a war that stretched across the stars. They felt rage, a fury so deep it turned worlds to ash. They saw shadows, not cast by light, but by something far worse, something watching from the void. Kethril fell to his knees, clutching his skull as the visions threatened to shatter his mind. His crew was weeping, screaming, whispering things that made no sense. Through the chaos, a single message cut through the noise, a voice, vast and ancient. It was not human, but it spoke with humanity's fury. You were warned, and then silence. The Seeker's Gift reappeared on the edge of conquered space days later, drifting aimlessly. Every member of the crew was alive, but changed. Kethril never spoke again. His once brilliant mind had been hollowed out, leaving behind only an empty, haunted stare. The others told stories that made no sense, rambling nonsense about something waiting in the dark, about human warships being more than machines, about a force that even the Concord feared to name. The Drellic High Council sealed the records. From that day forward, the last race brave enough to seek the truth joined the rest of the galaxy in silent agreement. No species, no matter how intelligent, no matter how advanced, would ever scan a human warship again. Not because they feared humanity, but because they feared what humanity had found. The galaxy fell into a quiet, uneasy acceptance. The truth was never spoken aloud, but it was understood by all. No one scanned a human warship, not the most advanced species, not the most reckless empires, not even the ones who had built their legacies on uncovering the unknown. Yet, in the darkness of the void, there were always those who refused to heed the warnings. The Sisari were one such race. Unlike the Zelnari, who sought to control knowledge, or the Drellic, who sought to understand it, the Sisari were a species of shadows, smugglers, data thieves, and black market warlords. To them, information was currency, and secrets were the most valuable treasure of all. They had heard the legends of Terran warships. They had seen the Concord's silence, the way even the most powerful empires refused to speak of what lurked within those hulking vessels, and that silence only made them want the truth more. In the lawless depths of uncharted space, where no treaties held sway and no fleets patrolled, the Sisari set their trap. A dead system, a faked distress signal, and a stolen cargo hauler rigged to scan anything that approached. It was a simple plan. Lure a human warship close, activate their scanners the moment it arrived, and transmit the data back to a hidden relay station before anyone could stop them. The moment the information was secured, the warlords would sell it to the highest bidder. A Sisari named Creel commanded the operation. He was no fool. He had heard the stories. But he did not believe in ghosts, curses, or anything beyond cold, hard reality. Everyone else was weak, he told his crew. They scanned human ships and panicked, but we will see the truth. The trap was set. The bait was perfect, and the humans came. A single Terran destroyer, the TNS Revenant, emerged from hyperspace in response to the distress signal. It was smaller than the other warships spoken of in hushed whispers. No dreadnought, no monstrous titan of war. But something felt wrong. Even from a distance, Creel sensed it. Something in his bones itched, like a silent alarm going off inside his mind. "Scan it," he ordered, pushing the thought away. His crew hesitated for only a moment before obeying. The scanners flared to life. And then, nothing. No alarms, no screams, no sudden failures. The ship's instruments worked perfectly. Creel exhaled in relief. "See? All nonsense. We have the data. Now we—" Then he saw the readings. There was nothing. No heat signatures, no energy output, no matter displacement. It was not possible. A ship could not exist in real space without registering something. Even cloaked vessels left behind gravitational distortions. Even the most advanced stealth technology could not erase a ship from existence. And yet, according to the scanners, the Revenant was not there. Creel's stomach twisted as a terrible realization crawled up his spine. It had let them scan it. For the first time in galactic history, a human warship had allowed itself to be observed. Not because the Sisari were smarter, not because they had outwitted some unknowable force, because the Revenant wanted them to see. The ship's lights flickered. Not the Revenant's, their own. The hum of the ship's engines stuttered. Creel grabbed the console as the air grew heavy. His lungs struggled to pull in breath, like the atmosphere had thickened into something wrong. The rest of his crew staggered, some collapsing as their bodies trembled violently. The ship was speaking. Not in words, not in code, in memories. Creel's vision twisted. He was no longer on his bridge, no longer aboard his ship. He was elsewhere, a battlefield, a world burned to blackened cinders, a fleet shattered to drifting corpses. And the warships, they were not machines. They never were. Something had been left behind in the aftermath of humanity's greatest war. Something that should have died. Something that had no place in the natural order of things. And yet, it endured. It had been given form, a body of metal, engines, and guns. But at its core, in the very bones of its being, it was not a warship. It was a grave. And something inside had never stopped screaming. Creel collapsed, vomiting as the vision ended. His body felt wrong, like his mind had brushed against something it was never meant to comprehend. He clawed at his console, desperately trying to shut down the transmission, to wipe the data. Too late. The Revenant moved. Not forward. Not back. It flickered. One moment it was before them. The next, inside their ship. The walls bled data. Screens turned to static. Crew members screamed as their eyes turned black, as their bodies locked in place, as their voices failed them. Creel saw the numbers on his console counting down. Data transmission complete. The information had been sent. To where? Creel did not know. He never would. The Revenant spoke one final time, a whisper that was not human. "Your debt is paid." Then there was nothing, no ship, no Sisari, no debris, only silence. The message the Sisari had stolen, the data they had fought so hard to uncover, was never found. But across the galaxy, in the depths of forgotten systems, where warships drifted in unmarked graves, some began to wake. The silence that followed the Sisari incident was different. Before, species avoided scanning human warships out of fear. Now they avoided them out of understanding. Something ancient had been disturbed. Something that had never been meant to be seen. For centuries, the Galactic Concord had believed itself to be the ruling power of the cosmos. They had mapped the stars, catalogued the species, built empires that stretched across hundreds of systems. But there were things in the void that had never been written in their records, because the ones who tried to record them never returned. The forgotten war. The pieces were scattered, but now some had begun putting them together. Across hidden archives, ancient reports whispered of humanity's great war. A conflict fought not against another empire, but against something else. It had been brief, violent. The humans had fought alone, no species had come to their aid, and then, silence. The war ended. The humans survived. And no one ever spoke of what exactly they had survived against. At first, the Conquered had believed humanity had simply won, destroying their enemy so completely that history had erased them. But the truth was so much worse. The whispering ships, something changed in the years following the Sisari's disappearance. Across the stars, Terran warships began moving in ways that defied reason. They appeared in systems with no record of departure. They drifted through battlefields that no longer existed. Some were seen hovering over ancient ruins that had been dead for millennia, their weapons powered but never firing. And then there were the whispers. Reports from cargo pilots, station workers, even criminals in the outer rings all spoke of the same thing. They would be in their ships, minding their business. And then, the static would come. A brief flicker over their comms. A burst of noise through their instruments. Not a distress signal. Not a message. Something else. A voice. Not words, not even thoughts, but a presence. Something watching. Something remembering. Most ignored it. Others panicked, abandoning their ships in terror. But some, the ones who had fought wars, the ones who had killed before, they understood it. It was not a threat. It was a warning, and one by one the oldest warriors of the galaxy began to leave the front lines. They resigned from their fleets. They abandoned their titles. Some fled into exile. Not because they feared the humans, but because they feared what the humans had locked away, and what would happen if it ever got out. The Galactic Concord held an emergency session. The evidence was undeniable. The humans had been hiding something from their war, something that should never have been disturbed. But now, the secret had leaked. The Scisari had sent a transmission before they vanished. No one knew where it had gone, but someone, somewhere, had received it. And if they ever opened it... The Concord made their decision. The first sealed order. A command that all members were required to follow, no matter their allegiance, no matter their standing. No species would attempt to scan, track, or research human warships ever again. Any fleet, any scientist, any individual who attempted to uncover the truth would be erased, not by the humans, but by themselves. Because there were things in the dark that even the most powerful empires could not fight, and whatever humanity had buried in their warships was never meant to be woken up. In a forgotten corner of the galaxy, in a nameless station long abandoned by the Conquered, a single console flickered to life. A signal. A transmission that had taken years to arrive. The last remnants of data stolen by the Scisari, now decrypted. On the screen, the message displayed only one thing. Coordinates, and far, far away, in the void where no stars shone. Something opened its eyes. The coordinates led to a place that should not have existed. A sector unmarked on any galactic chart. A void of absolute darkness, where sensors refused to function, where even the most advanced starships experienced unexplained malfunctions. The Conquered had erased all records of this place long ago, but now something had called it back into existence. A lone ship, small and unmarked, drifted towards the coordinates. It did not belong to any official fleet. It bore no insignia, no transponder codes. It had been stolen from a dozen different sources, assembled in the shadows by those who did not fear the warnings. Inside, a single figure watched as the void grew darker. Her name was Vena. She had spent the last decade hunting the truth. The fall of the Scisari, the whispers in the void, the ships that should not exist. It all led here. She was no fool. She knew the legends. The Conquered's first sealed order, the unspoken law of the galaxy. But Vena did not care for fear. She cared for knowledge, and so she followed the trail. As her ship neared the coordinates, her instruments died. The engines faltered. The artificial gravity flickered. The ship refused to move forward. It was as if the void itself had denied her entry. Vena exhaled sharply, reaching for the manual override. Then she saw it. A ship. Number A Grave. It was massive, far larger than the warships spoken of in the legends. A dreadnought the size of a city. But wrong. It drifted with no power, no lights, no movement. Yet Vena could feel it. A cold weight in her mind, pressing against her thoughts like fingernails scraping against bone. She had always believed warships were just machines. This was not a machine. It was a corpse, and something inside it was still awake. Her hands trembled, but she activated the scanners. A single scan. That was all she needed. The readings flooded in, data unlike anything recorded before. The ship was not built by humans. It was built from them. Not just their metals, not just their technology, their very essence. The walls were lined with something organic. The framework pulsed faintly, as if it were breathing. Then the data feed corrupted. The words on the screen twisted into something unreadable, flickering between languages. None of them known. And then a sound, not over the comms, inside her mind, a whisper, ancient and hollow. "You have seen too much," Vena gasped, staggering backward as her vision fractured. She saw flashes, a war long forgotten, ships burning, planets screaming, a terrible mistake, and the thing humanity had created to end it. The first warships, not machines, not tools of destruction, they had been seals, cages for something that had no name. Humanity had not survived their war. They had buried it, locked it away inside these husks of metal and flesh, imprisoned by weapons that were never meant to be unleashed. And now, because of her, because of the Caesari, because of those who refused to listen, one of them had woken up. Vena's breath came in ragged gasps as she stumbled toward the escape pod. Her ship was already dying. The systems were not failing. They were being devoured. Something inside the dreadnought had reached out. It had tasted her presence. And now it was hungry. Vena barely made it to the pod before the hull behind her melted away. Not by fire, not by weapons, but by something that had no shape. She launched herself into the void just as the ship was consumed. Her last sight before the pod's systems kicked in was the dreadnought, once silent, now shifting. Its darkened hull flickered. A glow, a heartbeat. It was waking up, and the void would never be silent again. Vena's escape pod tumbled through the void, spinning wildly, systems barely functional. She struggled to breathe, her mind still echoing with the whispers. The terrible knowledge she was never meant to have. She had done it. She had uncovered humanity's secret, and now the entire galaxy was in danger. Her pod's comms were barely working, but she forced them online. The transmission beacon was weak, but she did not care. She had to warn them. The conquered, the fringe colonies, the humans themselves. She had woken something up, and it would not be satisfied with just her. Fingers shaking, she typed out a simple message, a distress signal that would be picked up by anyone listening. Only 3 words. "It is awake." Then silence. The message spread like wildfire. The conquered scrambled, fleets were mobilized, emergency councils convened, the sealed order had been broken. And humanity? They did not speak. They did not issue a response. They did not deny or confirm. They simply moved. For the first time in centuries, every human warship, every silent, drifting relic, changed course. They converged toward one point, the place Vena had found. And across the galaxy, those who had once feared humanity's war machines now realized the terrible truth. They had never been warships. They had been prison guards. And now, their prisoners were stirring. Vena never made it back to civilization. Her escape pod was found days later, floating lifelessly near the conquered border. No damage, no forced entry. She was simply gone. Only her data logs remained intact, repeating the same message over and over. "It is awake." By then it was already too late, because across the void, in the deepest corners of space, something began to move. The lost war was not over. It had only been sleeping. And now, it was time to finish what had been started. For centuries, the galactic empires have expanded, conquering world after world, absorbing species into their vast domains. But there is a hard boundary, an invisible wall where every map simply stops: human space. No one dares to venture beyond. No one asks why. The greatest minds of the galaxy whisper about it, but fear keeps them silent. The Cathari, a proud and ancient race, had mapped thousands of star systems, their empire stretching further than any other. Yet, when they reached the human territories, their grand explorers simply stopped. They didn't return. No distress signals, no final messages, no wreckage. Just silence. The Galactic Council, a coalition of the most powerful species in the known universe, had long debated the human question. They were an oddity, a species that had clawed its way to the stars through war, bloodshed, and sheer reckless determination. Unlike other civilizations that grew through diplomacy or slow advancement, humans expanded like fire, violent, unpredictable, unstoppable. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they stopped. Their ships no longer explored. Their colonies did not spread beyond a specific border. No wars, no treaties, no further expansion. They had drawn a line in the void, and no one dared cross it. But someone had to ask. Ambassador Corin Vesh of the Zixari Dominion had spent his life studying the humans. They were fascinating, fragile yet terrifying, weak yet impossible to subdue. He had read the reports, listened to the stories, and felt the unease that ran through the council whenever the topic of Earth was brought up. And now he had his chance. A human delegation had extended an invitation, the first in over a century. A single ship was allowed to enter their space, to meet them on one of their core worlds. It was an honor, an opportunity, and a warning. Corin knew the risks. Everyone did. No one who crossed into human space had ever returned. But the question burned inside him. He had to know why. So, he accepted. As his ship crossed the invisible boundary, silence fell over his crew. The stars beyond seemed darker, the space itself heavier. Instruments flickered, detecting something wrong. The vast emptiness that had once seemed predictable was now unknowable. And then, the humans sent a message. "Welcome to our space, Ambassador Vesh. We hope you enjoy your stay." Their voices were calm. Too calm. Corin had spent his entire life believing the universe followed a set of rules, but deep down, he knew. The humans had found something out here, something no one else had, and whatever it was, they had made sure that no one else would ever find it. The human escort ship guided Corin's vessel through the void, deeper into the unknown. Unlike the grand warships of the Galactic Council, this human craft was sleek, unassuming, yet something about it unsettled him. It moved with eerie precision, as if it were alive. Every movement was too smooth, too controlled. Corin had seen ships of war, transports, and diplomatic cruisers before, but this was something else, something different. His crew remained silent, watching the dark expanse through the viewing panels. A feeling of unease gripped them all. The ship's sensors still flickered with uncertainty, unable to fully register what lay beyond. It was as if the very fabric of space was distorted here, unreadable. Then the human voice returned. "We are approaching Sol. Prepare for descent." The words were spoken in perfect standard galactic, yet they felt cold, artificial. Corin had met humans before, traders and diplomats who carried themselves with an almost arrogant confidence. But this was different. The screen flickered, and for the first time, Corin saw Earth. It was unlike any homeworld he had seen before. Other species cherished their planets, preserving nature in balance with their cities. But Earth was a paradox. Towering megastructures stretched beyond the clouds, yet vast stretches of untouched wilderness remained, as if the humans refused to let go of their past. The planet was alive, not just with civilization, but with something deeper, something ancient. Their ship entered the atmosphere, and Corin felt it immediately. A presence, a weight pressing against his mind. It wasn't a physical force, but something beyond his understanding. He glanced at his crew, and they felt it too. "Something is wrong," one of them whispered. The ship descended to a landing platform, and the doors opened. A group of humans waited outside, their expressions unreadable. Unlike other races that adorned themselves with medals and extravagant robes, these humans wore simple, practical uniforms. Their leader, a woman with piercing gray eyes, stepped forward. "Ambassador Vesh," she said, "welcome to Earth." Corin studied her, searching for some sign of deception, some clue to the mystery that had kept the galaxy at bay. He saw nothing. No fear, no arrogance, just certainty. They knew something. Something the rest of the universe wasn't meant to know. And he was about to find out why. Corin stepped onto the landing platform, his senses overwhelmed by the sheer presence of Earth. The air was thick, rich with unfamiliar scents. Strange flora, the unmistakable tang of industrial metals, and something else. Something he couldn't place. The human leader studied him with unwavering eyes, her expression unreadable. "I am Director Helena Graves," she said. "You must be tired from your journey." Her voice was calm, polite, yet it carried an underlying finality. Not a threat, not an invitation, just a statement of fact. "My crew," Corin started, but Helena raised a hand. "They will be accommodated," she said, "but your presence was requested alone." Corin stiffened. This was unusual. Every diplomatic meeting he had attended involved an entourage, guards, aides, advisors. But humans had a way of rewriting the rules. He glanced back at his crew. Their unease was palpable, but there was nothing they could do. He gave a slow nod, signaling them to comply. The doors of their vessel shut behind them, and he was alone. Helena gestured toward a waiting transport, a sleek, black vehicle with no visible markings. He hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The ride was silent. No unnecessary conversation. No scenery to distract him. The windows were dark, blocking any view of the world outside. Corin forced himself to remain calm. He had dealt with powerful figures before. He had stood before warlords and emperors. Yet, somehow, sitting beside this human woman in this unmarked transport, he felt something new. Not fear. Dread. After what felt like an eternity, the vehicle stopped. The doors opened, revealing a vast underground structure. The architecture was unsettling. Smooth, seamless, and impossibly precise. It was not the crude industrialism he had expected from humans. No visible seams, no unnecessary ornamentation. Just pure, functional design. "Follow me," Helena said. She led him through a series of hallways, deeper into the facility. The walls were lined with massive doors, each marked only by a series of numbers. No symbols, no explanations. The air grew colder. Finally, they reached a door unlike the others. It was larger, thicker. It hummed with a power Corin could feel in his bones. Helena placed her hand against a panel, and the door slid open. Inside, the room was dark. A single massive window overlooked something below, shrouded in shadows. Corin stepped closer, peering through the glass. Then the lights flickered on. And he saw it. His breath caught in his throat. His mind recoiled, struggling to comprehend what lay beneath. It was alive. It was enormous. And it was waiting. Corin turned to Helena, his voice barely a whisper. "What is that?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "That," she said, "is why no one crosses into human space." Corin's breath came in short, shallow bursts. His twin hearts pounded against his ribs as he stared through the reinforced glass, struggling to process what he was seeing. The chamber below stretched impossibly far into the darkness, its depths illuminated only by the cold glow of hidden lights embedded in the walls. And at the very center of it all was something. The creature, if it could even be called that, was vast beyond comprehension. its form shifting and undulating as if it were not entirely bound by the rules of this universe. It had no defined shape, no clear anatomy, yet his mind insisted on trying to impose logic onto it. One moment, it seemed like an amorphous mass of writhing tendrils. The next, it hinted at something vaguely humanoid, its elongated limbs twitching in slow, deliberate motions. But the worst part, the part that made his stomach churn, was the feeling of awareness. It was looking at him. Not with eyes. There were no eyes, but Corin could feel its attention settle on him, seeping into his very being like an oil slick spreading through water. His instincts screamed at him to run, to flee, to put as much distance as possible between himself and the entity imprisoned below. But his body wouldn't move. What is that?" he managed to rasp, forcing the words past dry lips. Helena Graves stood beside him, arms folded behind her back, her expression unreadable. She watched Corin, studying his reaction more than the thing below. "This is what we found," she said quietly. Or more accurately, what found us? Corin tore his gaze away from the creature and turned to her, desperate for an explanation. "You captured it?" he demanded. How?" Helena let out a slow breath. "No, Ambassador, we didn't capture it. We contained it." Corin's mind reeled. Containment was a dangerous word. It implied something too dangerous to be let loose, something powerful enough to require constant vigilance. He had encountered species that dabbled in such things, creatures from the fringes of the known universe that needed entire planets to serve as prisons. But this was different. This wasn't a being they had found on some distant world. This was something humans had encountered within their own space, and they had locked it away. His fingers curled against the railing as he tried to keep his voice steady. "Where did it come from?" Helena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned back toward the glass, watching the entity below. Its shifting form pulsed, reacting to their presence. "We don't know," she admitted. "We only know that they exist, and that we are not meant to see them." A chill ran down Corin's spine. "They." He swallowed hard. "How many?" Helena finally looked at him, her gray eyes sharp, unwavering. "Too many." Silence filled the observation deck. Corin's mind raced with possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. He had always believed that space, for all its mysteries, followed certain rules, that civilizations rose and fell, that empires clashed, that wars were fought and treaties were signed. But this was something else. Something older, something deeper, something that was never supposed to be known. "And this," Corin whispered, barely able to form the words, "is why no one crosses into human space?" Helena nodded. "The other empires assume we stopped expanding out of caution, that we reached the limits of our ambition." She turned back toward the creature, her face expressionless. "But the truth is, we went too far. We saw too much, and we learned the one thing no other species in the galaxy seems to understand." Corin could barely breathe. "And what is that?" Helena's voice was calm, almost too calm. "That we were never alone." Corin felt the weight of those words settle over him like a suffocating blanket. His people, the Zixari, had always prided themselves on their knowledge, their vast archives of star charts and ancient histories. They had mapped thousands of systems, encountered hundreds of species, waged wars, and brokered peace. Yet in all their records, in all their explorations, they had never encountered anything like this. "You should leave," Helena said, her voice softer now. Corin's gaze snapped to her. "What?" She turned fully to face him, her expression unreadable. "We granted you this meeting because we knew you would ask," she said. We knew that eventually someone in the council would push too far, that curiosity would get the better of one of you. Corin felt a sharp chill settle in his gut. You're warning me. Helena gave a small nod. We don't stop others from crossing into human space because of secrecy or power, she said. We do it because we're containing something, and if the rest of the galaxy starts poking around where it shouldn't, we can't guarantee that containment will hold. The meaning of her words sank into him like ice. The humans weren't isolationists. They weren't hoarding secrets for themselves. They were standing at the edge of something terrible, holding the line. And if that line broke... Corin felt his hands shaking. He wanted to argue, to demand answers, to insist that the Galactic Council had a right to know the full truth. But deep in his soul, he understood. Some truths were better left buried. Some doors were never meant to be opened. And the humans, reckless and terrifying as they were, had learned that lesson the hard way. Corin exhaled slowly and stepped away from the glass. Take me back to my ship. Helena nodded once. No argument, no further discussion, just quiet understanding. As they walked away from the observation deck, Corin forced himself not to look back, not to glance one last time at the shifting, impossible thing in the chamber below. But as the doors slid shut behind him, he heard it. A whisper, a voice not meant for mortal ears. We see you. Corin did not speak for the rest of the journey, because for the first time in his life, he truly understood fear. The journey back to his ship was suffocating. Corin sat in silence, his mind spinning with the weight of what he had just witnessed. The transport moved with the same eerie precision, gliding through the underground corridors without a single jolt or hesitation. Every second that passed, the whisper echoed in his mind. We see you. The words had no source, no mouth to speak them, and yet he had heard them as clearly as if they had been spoken into his ear. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to focus. He was a diplomat, an ambassador. He had dealt with the most cunning, manipulative beings in the galaxy. He had stood before warlords, debated with rulers who held the fates of entire worlds in their hands. And yet, nothing had prepared him for this. Across from him, Helena Graves sat with her usual composure, arms folded, gaze fixed ahead. She had not spoken since they left the chamber. She didn't need to. Finally, Corin found his voice. It was quieter than he intended. You've known about them for a long time. Helena nodded. Longer than you'd believe. Corin exhaled sharply. And you've kept it from the rest of the galaxy, all this time. A small, humorless smile flickered across her lips. Would you have done any different? He wanted to say yes. He wanted to insist that the Galactic Council had a right to know, that every species in the universe should be united against a threat of this magnitude. But the words died before they could leave his mouth. He wouldn't have done any different, because this wasn't a war. This wasn't an enemy that could be fought with fleets and weapons. It was something else, something older, something beyond the comprehension of any species that still believed itself in control of the universe. How many have seen it? He asked. Helena's expression darkened. Few. Fewer still who leave with their sanity intact. A shiver ran down his spine. You will return to your people, she continued. You will tell them that humanity refuses to open its borders, that we will not negotiate our stance, and if they push further... She turned her head, meeting his gaze. For the first time, Corin saw something in her eyes. Not fear, resolve. If they push further, she said, we won't stop them, but we won't be responsible for what happens next. A heavy silence settled between them. Corin let out a slow breath, his mind working through the implications. If he told the Council the truth, they would demand evidence. They would send scouts, then research teams, then warships, They would probe the depths of human space, believing themselves prepared for what they might find. But they weren't prepared. Not for this. The transport came to a halt. The doors slid open, revealing the landing platform. His ship sat where he had left it, his crew waiting anxiously at the base of the ramp. They stiffened as he stepped out, their eyes flickering between him and the human escorts. He turned to Helena one last time. "You're not telling me everything." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "No," she admitted. "I'm not." He considered pressing further, demanding to know the rest, but in the end, he didn't. Some knowledge wasn't meant to be gained. Without another word, he strode toward his ship. His crew followed him without question, sensing the weight of his silence. The doors sealed behind them, and Coran moved straight to the command deck. "Prepare for immediate departure," he ordered. The ship's engines roared to life. As they ascended, leaving Earth behind, Coran took one final glance at the blue planet shrinking below them. It was not an empire. Not a war-hungry dominion seeking to expand its reach. It was a wall, a thin, fragile wall between the known universe and something no one should ever see. And for the first time, Coran prayed it would hold. Because if it didn't, nothing would. As the ship broke free from Earth's gravity, Coran remained at the viewport, watching as the blue planet faded into the darkness of space. His twin hearts still thundered in his chest, his mind racing through everything he had witnessed. His crew remained silent behind him, sensing the weight in his stance, the stiffness in his posture. The view of Earth should have been comforting, just another inhabited world, one of many across the stars. But now it felt different. It was a prison. And for the first time in his life, Coran feared what lay inside. "Ambassador?" The voice of his second-in-command, Commander Velek, cut through the silence. "Are we clear to depart?" Coran nodded, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Set course for the council station. No delays." Velek hesitated. "No delays?" He cast a quick glance at the planet behind them. "Are we not filing a report with the humans before departure?" "No," Coran said quickly. "We leave now." There was a pause, and then Velek gave a small nod before turning to relay the orders. The crew, though confused, complied without question. The hum of the ship's engines intensified as they powered up for faster-than-light travel. Coran took his seat at the command console, his hands gripping the armrests tighter than necessary. His mind kept replaying the final words Helena Graves had spoken to him. "We won't stop them, but we won't be responsible for what happens next." It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. The ship lurched forward, stars streaking past the viewport as they accelerated into the void. Yet, no matter how far they traveled, Coran could still feel it. The weight of unseen eyes. The journey back to the Galactic Council Station was uneventful, but Coran found no relief in that. Every moment of silence, every stretch of empty space felt heavier than before. He spent hours reviewing his diplomatic notes, rewriting his report over and over again, trying to decide how much to tell the Council. And more importantly, how much to leave out. When they finally arrived, the station loomed ahead, a massive structure floating on the edge of neutral space, its design a blend of a dozen different species. It was a place of politics, of negotiations, of measured words and calculated alliances. It felt small now. As his ship docked, Coran straightened his uniform, drawing a deep breath. He needed to be careful. One wrong sentence, one misplaced warning, and the Council would push for deeper investigation. And that could not happen. The airlock hissed open, and he was greeted by an escort of officials. They were waiting for him. Word had already spread that he had met with the humans. A formal meeting was scheduled within the hour. Corrin didn't have time to prepare further. As he was led through the pristine halls of the council chambers, he kept his expression unreadable, his mind carefully constructing his words. When the great doors to the assembly opened, dozens of representatives from across the galaxy turned to face him, waiting to hear his report. He took his place at the center of the room, standing tall despite the weight pressing on his shoulders. "The negotiations with humanity have concluded," Corrin began, his voice steady, "and their stance remains unchanged. They will not expand. They will not open their borders, and they will not discuss the reasons behind their isolation." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. He could already see the dissatisfaction among the more aggressive factions. They would want to press further. They would demand answers. Corrin inhaled slowly. Now was the moment of decision. Tell the truth, and risk everything. Or lie, and pray the galaxy never learned what lurked beyond the edge of human space. He exhaled, his voice calm, practiced, controlled. Humanity has chosen their path, and I strongly advise the Council to respect it. Silence. Then the voices rose. Some agreed, others protested. Questions were thrown at him from every direction, but Corrin stood firm, his expression unreadable. Because there was one truth he knew for certain. Some secrets should never be uncovered, and some warnings should always be heeded, even when they came from the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The council chambers erupted in a chaotic wave of murmurs and debates, the voices of dozens of species rising in frustration. Corrin remained still, letting the noise wash over him. He had expected this reaction. The Galactic Council had spent centuries expanding, learning, and cataloging every corner of the known universe. The idea that a species, a younger species no less, could block them from further exploration was an insult to their collective authority. A voice cut through the noise. "Ambassador Corrin." He turned his head toward the source. High Chancellor Virak of the Kevar Dominion, a towering figure of scaled green skin and piercing golden eyes, stood from his seat. Unlike the others, his voice carried no frustration, only cold calculation. "You expect us to accept this answer?" Virak asked, his gaze locked onto Corrin like a predator studying its prey. "To simply respect their refusal?" Corrin kept his expression neutral. "Yes." A ripple of dissatisfaction spread through the chamber. Virak's lips curled in something resembling a smile. "And why, exactly, should we do that?" He leaned forward slightly. "You're asking the Council to abandon a region of space simply because the humans said so. You must understand how weak that sounds." Corrin's fingers twitched at his sides. "It is not weakness," he said carefully. "It is wisdom." Virak's eyes narrowed. "Then share this wisdom with us." The chamber quieted, all eyes on Corrin. He felt his twin hearts pound against his ribs. He had expected this challenge, but he still had no perfect answer. Tell them the full truth, and they would demand proof. And proof would mean expeditions. Expeditions would mean ships entering human space. And then the thing that had whispered to him would know. It would see them. Corrin forced himself to breathe slowly. "The humans have been within their borders for centuries," he said. "They do not seek conquest, nor do they interfere with the affairs of others. If they wished for war, they would have waged it already. If they wished for allies, they would have sought them out. Instead, they remain contained within their space, not because of us, but because of something they will not name." He let the weight of his words settle before continuing. "And if a species as unyielding as humanity refuses to move forward, perhaps we should ask why before demanding they step aside." Virak's golden eyes gleamed. "Or perhaps," he countered, They have discovered something valuable within their territory and wish to keep it for themselves. Corin's jaw tightened. This was dangerous. The Kavar Dominion was one of the most ambitious members of the Council. They did not see obstacles. They saw challenges. If Virak believed humanity was hiding something of worth, he would push for forceful intervention. The humans did not issue threats, Corin said, keeping his voice even. They did not posture, nor did they attempt to deceive me. They made one thing clear. He looked directly at Virak. If we enter their space, they will not protect us. They will not take responsibility for what happens to those who ignore their warnings. A murmur of unease spread through the chamber. Some of the representatives glanced at each other, their confidence wavering. But Virak remained unimpressed. And you believe them? Corin met his gaze without flinching. Yes. Virak studied him for a long moment. Then, with a slight scoff, he sat back in his seat. Your caution is noted, Ambassador. But Corin knew this wasn't over. Virak wasn't convinced, and neither were others. As the debate continued, Corin's stomach twisted with unease. He had done what he could, but it wouldn't be enough. There were too many voices in this room who saw mystery as an invitation rather than a warning. They would send ships. They would try to map what lay beyond the human borders. And when they did, something would look back at them. Corin clenched his hands, a cold dread sinking deep into his bones. He only prayed that when the council finally understood the truth, it wouldn't be too late. The council meeting dragged on for hours, filled with debates, counter-arguments, and bureaucratic posturing. Some representatives argued that humanity's secrecy warranted investigation. Others, more cautious, suggested patience and diplomacy. But Corin knew the truth. The council was not an institution known for patience. By the time the session ended, nothing had been decided outright. But he saw it in their eyes. The gears were already turning. The powerful factions, especially the Kavar Dominion, would not let this mystery go. As Corin left the chamber, his second-in-command, Velek, fell into step beside him. They're going to send ships, Corin sighed. I know. They won't listen to the warning. I know. They walked in silence for a while, their footsteps echoing in the grand halls of the station. Outside the great windows, the vastness of space stretched endlessly, filled with the lights of arriving and departing ships. Corin wondered how many of them would make it back once they crossed the wrong border. Velek hesitated before speaking again. What exactly did you see on Earth? Corin stopped walking. His mind flashed back to the moment in that underground chamber, the whisper, the suffocating presence, the way reality itself seemed to bend around whatever it was that the humans had hidden. How could he put it into words? He turned to Velek, his expression grim. I saw something I don't understand. He paused. And I don't want to understand it. For the first time, Velek looked uneasy. That bad? Corin exhaled slowly. Worse. They resumed walking, but Corin could tell his second-in-command was shaken. Good. A little fear was better than reckless curiosity. When they reached their ship, Corin wasted no time preparing for departure. He didn't want to linger on the station. He had done what he could. Now, he could only wait. As the ship disengaged from the station and set a course for neutral space, Corin allowed himself a brief moment of relief. He had delivered the warning. The rest was out of his hands. Or so he thought. 3 weeks later, the distress call came. Corin was in his quarters when the alert flashed across his screen. His heart pounded as he read the report. A Kavar scouting vessel had gone missing. In human space. More reports followed in quick succession. Ships sent to investigate had also vanished. No wreckage, no distress beacons, No survivors. Just silence. The council was in chaos. The Kiva Dominion was demanding answers. The humans gave none. They simply repeated the same message. Do not come here. Do not send more ships. We will not help you. Corin felt a deep chill settle in his bones. This was it. The thing he had feared. Someone had ignored the warning. And now, something was awake. The council convened an emergency session. Tensions were high. The representatives divided. Some demanded retaliation against humanity for their refusal to cooperate. Others urged caution, fearing an unseen threat. High Chancellor Virac was livid. "We have lost our people," he roared, slamming a clawed fist onto the table, "and the humans refuse to answer for it." Corin sat silently, listening. His mind was racing, piecing things together. He knew, deep down, that the humans weren't responsible for the missing ships. Something else had taken them. A deep dread filled him as he recalled Helena Graves' words. "We won't stop them, but we won't be responsible for what happens next." This was exactly what she had meant. Corin stood. "Chancellor," he said, addressing Virac, "you believe humanity is withholding information. That may be true, but I urge you to consider. What if this is not their doing?" Virac's eyes burned with anger. "Then who else could be responsible?" Corin hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You assume we are the only ones looking?" He let the implication settle. What if something was looking back? The chamber fell into an uneasy silence. The thought was too terrible to consider. Virac sneered. "If there is a threat, we must uncover it. We cannot let humanity dictate the limits of our knowledge." Corin clenched his fists. This was exactly the kind of thinking that would doom them all. But before he could argue further, the emergency alarms blared. A new transmission had arrived. From the missing Kiva vessel. And what it contained was worse than anything Corin could have imagined. The chamber fell into a stunned silence as the emergency transmission played across the central holoscreen. The image was grainy, flickering with static, but the voice that came through was unmistakably Kivar. "This is Scout Vessel Vorash. We are lost." The voice was trembling. Corin had never heard a Kivar sound afraid before. They were a warrior species, bred for battle, their culture built on strength and dominance. But this was terror. "They are here," the voice continued, barely a whisper now. "Not human, not human. They are watching. We were wrong. We were—" A sudden burst of static cut off the voice. Then something else came through. Not a scream, not a cry for help, a sound, a low, distorted whisper layered over itself 1,000 times, as if a chorus of unseen mouths were speaking in unison. It wasn't in any known language. It was something deeper, something primal, and every single person in the chamber felt it. Some clutched at their chests as if the sound alone was pressing against their lungs. Others shuddered as a deep, cold dread crawled down their spines. Then suddenly, silence. The transmission cut out. The chamber remained frozen in horror. No one spoke. No one moved. Until Virac stood. "Where did that signal come from?" His voice was sharp, but there was an edge to it, something he was trying to suppress. A technician hesitated before responding. It originated from the far edge of human space." Virac's jaw tightened. "Then we send a fleet." Corin's stomach dropped. "You can't be serious." Virac turned to him, eyes burning. "We have lost ships. We have lost people. You expect us to sit idly by while—" "That thing in the transmission," Corin interrupted, "was not Kevar. It was not human. It was something else." Virac scoffed. "And what do you suggest? That we leave our missing to whatever horror lurks out there?" Corin's mind raced. There had to be another way. "Send a diplomatic envoy. Speak with the humans. They know what's out there. If we push into their space without understanding—" Virak slammed a fist onto the table. "Understanding is for cowards. Action is what we need now." Corin clenched his fists. "If you send ships into human space, you won't just be dealing with the humans." His voice lowered. "You'll be dealing with whatever they are hiding from." For the first time, Virak hesitated. Not because he was convinced, but because the fear in the room was palpable. The transmission had shaken the council. They all felt something unnatural in that whisper, something beyond their comprehension. But warriors like Virak did not yield to fear. They fought against it, and Coran knew deep down that no argument would stop him now. Virak turned away. "We mobilize a fleet." The fleet arrived at the edge of human space 2 standard weeks later. Corin had not been invited. He had not been consulted. He had only received a brief, cold message from Virak. "Stay out of the way." And so he did. He stayed in his own vessel, stationed at a distance, monitoring the situation from afar, watching, waiting. At first, nothing happened. The Kaver fleet sent out long-range scans. They found nothing. No wreckage, no human defenses mobilizing, just empty space. And then the whispers began. Not over comms, not over any known frequency, inside their minds. It started as an itch in the back of their thoughts, a quiet presence, a feeling of being observed. Then the voices grew louder. One by one, crew members began reporting hearing something, a whisper just beyond the edge of comprehension. And then the shadows came. They weren't ships, they weren't life forms, they weren't anything the Kavar had words for. They were just there, watching, waiting. One Kavar vessel opened fire, and that was when the screaming began. It didn't come from comms. It came from the ships themselves, metal twisted, hulls bent, as if unseen hands were crushing them from the inside out. Some ships tried to escape, only to vanish mid-flight, winking out of existence without a trace. The flagship tried to transmit a distress signal. The last words the fleet sent back to the council were, "We were wrong." Then, silence. The entire fleet was gone. Not destroyed, not obliterated in battle, simply erased, as if they had never been there at all. 3 days later, Corin sat alone in his quarters, staring blankly at the void outside his viewport. He had known this would happen. He had tried to stop it. And yet even he had not expected the sheer, unfathomable finality of it. The Kavar Dominion was in chaos. The council was shaken to its core. Even Virak, the arrogant, unshakable warrior, had disappeared, lost to whatever force had claimed his fleet. Humanity remained silent. No threats, no warnings, no reaction at all. As if this outcome had been inevitable. As if this was not the first time it had happened. A private message appeared on Corin's screen. From an anonymous sender, a single line of text. "We told you not to look." Corin closed his eyes. Somewhere, out in the darkness, something was awake now, and it knew they had seen it. The message sat on Coran's screen, its meaning sinking deep into his thoughts like a stone in a vast black ocean. "We told you not to look, not a threat, not a warning, just a statement of fact." His hands clenched into fists. The Kavar fleet was gone. Not destroyed, not crippled, just erased, as if they had never existed in the first place. And humanity? They didn't celebrate. They didn't retaliate. They simply watched, unbothered, as if this had all played out before. Corin exhaled slowly. He had one choice now, one chance to do what no one else had the sense to do. He had to talk to the humans. The journey to Earth was uneventful. No human ships intercepted him. No warnings blared through his comms. But that was what unsettled him most. They knew he was coming, and they weren't stopping him. That meant one of two things. Either they didn't see him as a threat, or they didn't see anyone as a threat anymore. The surface of Earth was as unassuming as ever. Bright blue oceans, vast continents teeming with life, cities stretching into the sky, filled with technology that was dangerously behind what some other species had developed. Yet here humanity was, untouched, unchallenged, unafraid. Helena Graves was waiting for him. She stood on a quiet observation deck overlooking a sprawling city, hands folded behind her back, a faint smirk on her face. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Corin stopped a few paces away from her. "You knew this would happen." Helena tilted her head slightly. "We warned you." Corin's hands twitched. "You let them die." Her smirk faded. "No." She turned to face him fully. "We let them make their own choice." Corin growled in frustration. "And what is this thing? The one that took them? What did they wake up?" Helena studied him, as if deciding how much to say. Then she sighed. "It's not a thing, Corin." He froze. Something in her voice made his skin crawl. "It's not a species, not a force, not even a god." She looked out over the city again. "It's the space between things." Corin's pulse pounded in his ears. "I don't understand." "You don't need to." Helena's gaze was distant now, her voice quieter. "We learned a long time ago that some questions shouldn't be asked, some doors shouldn't be opened. But every species that rises, that builds, that hungers for more, they all make the same mistake. They think the void is empty." She turned back to him, her expression unreadable. "But the void isn't empty, Corin. It's just silent. Until someone makes the wrong kind of noise." His breath caught in his throat. The Caver fleet hadn't been destroyed. They had been heard, and whatever had heard them had reached back. Corin shook his head. That doesn't make sense. How could you know all this?" Helena smiled, but it was a sad, tired kind of smile. "Because we were the first ones to look." The realization struck him like a physical blow. Humanity had already made this mistake, long ago, and they had survived. Corin stepped back, his mind racing. "You're keeping it contained?" "As much as we can." "But for how long?" Helena exhaled. "For as long as we don't repeat the mistakes of others." Corin looked past her, at the vast, thriving planet of Earth, a species that had stopped expanding, that had stopped reaching too far, that knew better than to challenge the unknown. And now he understood why the galactic map ended at human space. Not because humans were a threat, but because humans knew where the real threat lay, and the rest of the galaxy was too arrogant to listen. Corin turned, his stomach churning with unease. "What happens next?" Helena's voice was steady. "That depends." "On what?" She met his gaze, and for the first time, Corin saw something behind her eyes, something ancient, something haunted. "On whether or not the galaxy can learn to be quiet." Corin left Earth that day with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain. There was no war to fight, no enemy to defeat, just an endless, watching silence, and the knowledge that somewhere, out in the void, something was still listening.